President Muhammadu Buhari has asked African leaders to ensure that the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is fair to all. The president made this call in Niamey, Niger Republic, when he signed the agreement, making Nigeria the 53rd state on the continent to append his signature to the document. The signing ceremony was the first event at the opening of the 12th Extraordinary Summit of the African Union and launch of the operational phase of the AfCFTA. The president had delayed signing the agreement, which entered into force May 30, 2019, to give room for extensive consultations with stakeholders. In his remarks shortly after signing the agreement, the president declared that Nigeria's commitment to trade and African integration has never been in doubt, nor was it ever under threat. He told the summit that Nigeria will build on the event by proceeding expeditiously with the ratification of the AfCFTA. Joining me now on the News at 10 to discuss the implication of the CFTA for Nigeria is Chief Executive Officer, Financial Derivatives Company and economist Bismarck Rewane. Mr. Rewane, thank you for joining us on the News at 10. So the president finally signs Nigeria onto the AfCFTA. What does this entail for Nigeria?
First of all, it's the world's largest free trade area. We have 1.2 billion people, and we have GDP of $2.5 trillion. So for Nigeria and South Africa, who are the largest economies, it's a big deal. Regional integration and free markets actually always leads to higher growth, more rapid growth, and impact on the people. So, but we're going to reduce 90% of the tariffs by the year 2022. So where does Nigeria stand relative to Africa right now? Nigeria has 31% of the GDP. Actually, Nigeria has 31% of the exports of Africa. Nigeria has a population of 200 million compared to the 1.2 billion. And Nigeria is having an inflation rate of 11.4% compared to African inflation rate of 8.5%. Now, Nigeria's GDP is 21.4% of the total GDP of Africa, which is $2.5 trillion. And South Africa is the next, it's 16%. These two economies are actually underperforming the African average. Nigeria has grown at 2%, whilst South Africa is actually a negative growth. Basically, what this means is that Nigeria, like Germany and Netherlands and France in Europe, are going to benefit from the economies of scale and the localization of industry. Now, which are the industries that are going to benefit most from this? One, refineries. Right now, Nigeria's Dangote's refinery is going to be able to produce 500,000 barrels of oil a day, and the petrochemical plant. By the time we get up to speed, we will be the hub for refining for the whole of West Africa and Central Africa. Cement, another sector where Nigeria is competitive. Food processing, you will find that companies like Nestle and all the food processors are going to be able to actually scale up here and produce here rather than producing in every African country. They produce in one big country, create jobs there, and move these things across. Brewing, minerals, and banking and aviation. Nigerian banks are already been told to actually scale up their capital so that they can compete, and of course aviation. The negative side is an industry like auto manufacturing, where Nigeria, in spite of the high duty and high price of cars, Nigerians have not been able to benefit from this. I suspect that we are going to have to comply by bringing down our tariffs on cars, and cars will be cheaper for Nigerians.
So it does seem like the advantages outweigh the disadvantages.
Absolutely.
So why was it so difficult to sign this in the first place, and why were we shying away from putting pen to paper?
I think it's out of ignorance, and an objection is a request for further information. So the president and the executive team were saying, look, let's consult. They didn't want to go ahead and just do it, and then people accuse them of being high-handed. So it was carrying everybody along. The only country that has not signed this thing is Eritrea, but Eritrea is because of some other things. But the fact that Nigeria signed, the biggest economy in Africa, it's a big, big deal. How will it affect people? Now, one, for the economy, we will see more rapid growth. we'll see greater opportunities, we'll be competitive. Nigeria's economic destiny has always been shaped by involuntary action, by exogenous rather than endogenous. If we wait for us to do it internally, we'll never get anywhere. So now this is going to force us to be competitive. We are going to have to attract investments in here. If you want Nestle or Guinness or Nigerian breweries or South African breweries or Promacedo to invest in this country, you've got to give them incentives, you've got to protect them, you have to deal with your security issues and deal with your enforcement of laws. When you do that, you find that your manufacturing sector will be competitive, unemployment will reduce, inflation, because output has increased, will actually come down. But one thing though, that trade is always followed by currency adjustments. You cannot go into a free trade agreement without having some reform of your currency markets. So I would suspect that Nigeria, the French-speaking countries, will have to now head towards a common currency.
As you've mentioned, a common currency, I know that ECOWAS is working towards a common currency.
Yes.
So will that also be affected by the AfCFTA?
Well, it should accelerate it, but the fact that the ECOWAS says that they will have a common currency by the year 2020 is not going to happen. It takes years. So first of all, you have a custom union, followed by a free trade, followed by a free movement, and then before you have a currency. But to have a currency, you now have what they call convergence criteria. You cannot have Ghana having 10% fiscal deficit to GDP ratio and Nigeria having 3.5%. You know, they have to come to some kind of equilibrium before they do it. But more important that because of this, our import duty contribution to our revenues will come down because duties will come down. Excise duty will have to reduce. But what you're going to have is more jobs, greater compliance, and you know, let's say by the year 2022, it's not going to happen overnight. So no, let us not just be carried away by this.
Yeah, it's a very lovely picture that you paint. I mean,
Yes.
that's the ideal situation that should happen.
But that's what's going to be. That's what's going to happen, really.
Yes, but you know what we say in Nigeria is that we need to have an enabling business environment, and that's what we keep talking about. We don't seem to.
This will force you to do it, because if you don't do it, everybody will go, look, you just go to Cotonou or Lome and produce them and bring it to Nigeria.
You mean we will have stable power supply? We'll be forced to have stable power supply.
You'll be forced to do it.
Forced to have all the other infrastructure necessary.
You see, some of these things are not rocket science. You will be compelled, you will invest in the right sectors. You will have proper people managing the key sectors of the economy. What has happened recently is that we've just been, you know, we've had excess supply of intellectual dishonesty, so that we're lying to ourselves rather than telling the truth. The reality is that with this, because you are competitive, because you are dealing with the bigger picture with everybody, you are forced to be honest, and you are forced to deal with your problems themselves. But net, Nigeria and South Africa, Kenya and Ghana are going to benefit more than any other part of Africa. And
these are all English-speaking countries you mentioned.
Well, the French-speaking countries are also going to benefit. Ivory Coast, Ethiopia. So to be honest with you, almost everybody is going to benefit. We are going to be better off. If you look at Europe, Portugal, Spain, Greece, in the past, they were laggards. But ever since they went to the European Union, you can see that they've all taken off. And so the difference between the standard of living in Spain, Italy, and that in France and Germany has narrowed. Everybody, it's a tide that lifts every boat. So I won't be bothered about it. In fact, it's time for Nigerians to celebrate, because you're going to have a much more effective government. Any government that is not effective will fail within the African competitive environment.
Good to know the future is here for Africa.
Absolutely.
Mr. Rewane, thank you so much for joining us on the News at 10.
It's a pleasure.